Members, the House is resumed. We are on the third reading of the Government Communications Security Bureau Amendment Bill, the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security Amendment Bill, Intelligence and Security Committee Amendment Bill. Before dinner, Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman was speaking and has 9 minutes, 30 seconds remaining.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, this bill is vital legislation which needs to be passed. It's in the very best interests of the nation's security. It's in the very best interests of the New Zealand people. And it is a legislation which, while I'm not surprised that the Green Party is not supporting, I am very, very disappointed with the comments of Labour members here tonight because, Mr. Speaker, those members over there should know better, and they do know better, but they have chosen to play politics with this issue right throughout this debate. Because what they realise, and Grant Robertson fully understands it, is that the government is just tidying up the flawed legislation of 2003, legislation that the Labour government brought into being. And there was an inherent contradiction in that law. It allowed the GCSB to act on behalf of government agencies who had a lawful basis for carrying out surveillance activities, but at the same time, that legislation stipulated that the GCSB couldn't spy on New Zealanders. Now, this legislation which the House is going to pass tonight provides a clear and consistent statutory framework for the GCSB as well as greater oversight. And that is absolutely important that the public understands that, because this does not widen the powers of the GCSB as the angry man from the Koru Club is claiming. What it's actually doing is narrowing the powers of the GCSB and providing greater oversight. And I can tell you, as technology moves forward, Mr. Speaker, the nature of the national security threats that we face will continue to evolve. And the new Section 8 in this bill sets out and confirms that the GCSB has 3 functions, and Chris Finlayson covered those very well in his speech. But just to reiterate, they're foreign intelligence, cyber security and assistance to police, the NZDF and the SIS. And in light of the modern threats to New Zealand's physical and economic security, each and every one of those functions is vital. And I think it's disappointing that no one from the Labour side has actually discussed the substance of the bill, apart from a little bit there from David Parker. But there needs to be a far greater contribution from Labour members, but the time has passed, the debate is virtually over. But it's also critical that the GCSB has proper oversight and operates pursuant to very clear legislation. And this bill achieves all of those critical requirements. On the matter of foreign intelligence, the function of the GCSB is largely unchanged, but the law is made clear and simplified and adds protection for New Zealanders inadvertently caught up in incidentally obtained intelligence, and that's a very important point. As regards the cyber security function, the bill gives the GCSB a clearly defined and limited role. And as we know, cyber attacks, Mr. Speaker, are a growing and ever-changing threat, and this law needs to be updated in response. So for that reason, the bill sets out a very clear mandate for the GCSB to help government organisations and private companies to prevent cyber attacks and thereby protecting our economic well-being and our intellectual property. And the threat, Mr. Speaker, from those cyber attacks is very real. The damage that they can inflict, from theft of intellectual property through to damage of critical infrastructure, is a threat that New Zealand faces on an almost daily basis. And those who suggest that New Zealand should not empower our security agency to protect the country from those type of threats are frankly being both very reckless and extremely naive. Left-wing critics of this bill, Mr. Speaker, are effectively saying that New Zealand should refuse to provide cyber security protection to New Zealand citizens and businesses. Doing so wouldn't be a grand act of principle. It would be the single most reckless security decision that any New Zealand government has ever taken. No serious political party would ever consider abolishing the police and leaving New Zealanders vulnerable to internal criminal threats. No serious party would consider abolishing the NZDF and leaving New Zealand unable to protect itself from external threats or to pursue our interests overseas. And so no serious political party could seriously suggest kneecapping the GCSB's cyber security function, New Zealand's biggest single defence against a new and insidious form of attack that is more than doubling every year. But Russell Norman explicitly spoke out against the GCSB. He spoke about a global surveillance state. He called New Zealand under the national government an authoritarian state. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that is misleading and untruthful. But what it does show is that the Greens do not believe that the GCSB has a function in New Zealand. And quite frankly, that is reckless and irresponsible and just demonstrates that they are unfit to ever be part of a government. And I think the Labour Party should bear that in mind. The bill also provides the GCSB with the legal framework needed to ensure they can provide a vital level of protection to New Zealand and the oversight to make sure that they do so lawfully. In terms of its assistance function, this bill makes it clear that when the GCSB assists another agency, it's subject to the same limitations, oversight and restrictions that the requesting agency is subject to. And as Minister of Defence, I'm directly aware of just how important the assistance of the GCSB is to keeping our people safe when they are overseas on deployment. And while we can't talk about the operational details, it has to be put on record that the work of the GCSB saves New Zealand lives when our people are on deployment in theatre. And there's no question that's happened. So I'm very disappointed, actually, that Phil Goff has not shared some of the knowledge that he has from his time as Minister of Defence and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and instead has decided to play petty party politics. But it's also true that GCSB's resources are absolutely vital for assisting the SIS and police. It would be beyond stupid to try and replicate those functions independently across all three agencies. That would drastically increase costs and decrease effectiveness. Now, of course, there's been a lot of talk during this debate about oversight of the GCSB, but increased oversight is exactly what this legislation enables. It provides a clear and consistent statutory framework under which the GCSB will operate. The Labour Party's done a good job of pretending to be constructive during the debate, but their demands for safeguards have pretty much been hollow political posturing. The safeguards are already there in the legislation. They're probably the most extensive safeguards that exist in any New Zealand legislation. Labor has called for limits on warrantless powers. The warrantless powers in their 2003 legislation are severely restricted by this bill, which will pass tonight. Labor has also called for the Inspector-General to be given more powers. That has already happened. The Inspector-General will now be one of the most powerful independent officials in New Zealand, and further, they will have an advisory panel to back them up. Under the old legislation, the Inspector-General of Intelligence was a one-person band with limited powers. Under this new bill, the Inspector-General will be supported by staffing resources, a deputy and a two-person panel. The Inspector-General will also be able to undertake on-the-spot surprise audits. Labor's called for a review of the legislation. Not only does this legislation require that an independent review occur before 30 June 2015, but that subsequent reviews be held every 5 to 7 years. So it's already there in the bill. So for all the hyperbole, the debate has boiled down to the simple question of whether new sections 8 to 8D represent an expansion of the GCSB's powers. Everything has been noise. This bill provides a vast array of further checks and balances. New limitations have been added, such as the requirement that warrants must be issued jointly by the Minister and the Commissioner for Security Warrants, and that privileged communications cannot be targeted. The GCSB will have to report annually on the number of warrants and authorisations issued and the number of instances where it provided assistance to the three agencies. Further public hearings will be held, and there will be an independent review of the operations and performance of the GCSB and NZSIS in 2015, and then every 5 to 7 years afterwards. Those changes have improved the bill, enabling greater transparency and stronger independent oversight. There's also been plenty of scrutiny and debate around process. There were 122 submissions. The Prime Minister chaired the committee that considered those submissions, and I would ask the public to consider this. In what other country in the world could someone like Kim.com come into our Parliament and harangue a Prime Minister? And that's exactly what happened there. So to say we haven't been upfront and open about the bill is totally misleading. So anyway, I think we've outlined comprehensively the case for the GCSB. We've described the three functions. This is vital legislation for New Zealand. It's intrinsically tied up with our security. It's a good bill. It should pass, and I commend this bill to the House.
Members, this debate has concluded. The question, point of order, Brendan Horan.
Speaker, sir, given the importance of this bill, I seek leave of the House and my colleagues to make a very short 5-minute contribution to this bill.
This is a time-limited debate. There have been 12 speakers. The member can seek leave, but I just reminded the member there's been 12 speakers.